They say power corrupts, but sometimes power does something far worse. It transforms a man into a living nightmare. Picture this. A palace lit with golden lamps, music echoing through marble halls, Rome's highest elites dining in silence. Not from respect but fear. At the head of the table sits a man who believes he's a god. Not in poetry, not in politics. He actually believes it. His name, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. The world remembers him as Caligula, and Rome tried to erase what he did behind those palace walls. This isn't the story of a mad emperor. It's the story of a calculated predator, a man who used humiliation like a weapon, who made torture an art, who didn't just kill enemies. He made them watch first. You've heard of dictators, of tyrants, but Caligula created something darker, rituals so disturbing that Roman historians could barely write about them without trembling. This isn't mythology. This happened, and for decades those who survived dared not speak. But the walls remember. Today we're going to open a door that stayed shut for 2,000 years, and what's behind it will haunt you. Rome, 39 CE, a feast fit for gods. You're sitting beside your wife, surrounded by Rome's most powerful senators. Silver cups overflow with wine, laughter floats through the air. It should be a night of celebration. Then silence. Caligula rises. No warning, no reason. He points at your wife. Smiling, he says, "She's coming with me." Guards move fast. She's screaming your name. But you stay frozen. If you move, if you protest, you die. Everyone knows that. So you watch as she vanishes behind a curtain. The next 30 minutes are a living hell. From the other side of the wall, you hear everything. Muffled cries, cruel laughter, the sound of a monster playing God. When she returns, her dress is twisted, her eyes empty. Caligula sits down across from you. Without shame, without pause, he begins describing everything he just did to your wife. Every detail, out loud, in front of every man in the room. You keep your face still. You have to. Even blinking too hard could be seen as disrespect, and disrespect gets you killed. No one speaks. No one looks up, because they know next time it could be their wife. This wasn't a one-time madness. This was routine. Caligula called them banquets, but they were rituals of humiliation. And according to records kept by imperial scribes, he held over 40 of them in just 4 years. These weren't acts of rage or lust. They were cold, planned exercises in domination. Caligula didn't rule through laws or war. He ruled by shattering pride. Rome was built on dignity, your name, your family, your honor. It was more important than your life. Caligula understood that perfectly, and he turned it against the people who were supposed to be untouchable. He didn't just want obedience. He wanted silence soaked in shame. Senators sat quietly while their wives were dragged away. If they objected, they died. If they said nothing, they died inside. It was a perfect trap. Some historians once dismissed these stories as exaggeration, but ancient writers like Suetonius and Seneca were there. They witnessed it. They wrote about it carefully, cautiously, because even in writing, the horror was too raw. Caligula's twisted genius was not just in the acts themselves, but in how he made the victims complicit. Witnesses couldn't speak out without admitting they had stood by and done nothing. Either way, their reputation was destroyed. One account speaks of a woman named Ennia Thrasil. Her husband, Senator Marcus Silanus, had served Rome with honor for years. Ennia was 26, from an old noble bloodline. One August night, Caligula pointed at her. She was taken. Seneca wrote in his memoir that the emperor returned and described her in brutal, degrading terms, like she was an object. Marcus said nothing, but under the table Seneca noticed his hands. He was gripping his knife so tightly, his knuckles were white. 3 months later, Marcus was found dead. The records said natural causes. Seneca said otherwise. The emperor took his honor. So Marcus took his own life. That's the level of control Caligula had. He didn't need swords. He used shame like a noose and power like poison. And taking married women wasn't even the worst of it. Soon, Caligula turned his gaze toward something even more horrifying, the destruction of innocence. Not in secret, not in darkness, but as public entertainment. Dio Cassius, a Greek historian with access to imperial records, later wrote of the virgin auctions, 12 separate events, each more vile than the last. Families who had displeased the emperor were targeted. Their daughters, often 14 to 17 years old, were summoned to the palace. They were told they were serving the empire. In truth, they were being sold. These auctions weren't about money. They were about control, about breaking families that dared displease the emperor. The highest bidder didn't win their hand in marriage. They won the right to take their virginity on the spot in public. With Caligula watching, laughing, senators, merchants, even foreign guests participated. Some were the girl's own relatives, and no one stopped it. One record speaks of a girl named Drusilla Minor, not the sister Caligula adored, but a 15-year-old daughter of Senator Aia Silanus. On March 18, 40 CE, she was sold for 3,400 denarii to a merchant from Syria. 3 days later, she was returned to her family. That word, returned, says it all. Her name was erased from all future records. Her father never spoke it again. She was sent away to a remote villa, and history lost her. Some tried to save their daughters by marrying them off early. Caligula responded by voiding those marriages and taking the girls anyway. And just like that, noble families who had served Rome for centuries were silenced forever, and still this wasn't the end. What came next made even the most brutal of Rome's traditions seem tame. Caligula moved beyond humiliation. He began demanding worship, and the rituals only grew darker from there. When Caligula declared himself a god, it wasn't poetic. It wasn't a metaphor. He believed it, and he expected everyone else to believe it too, or pretend convincingly enough to survive. He ordered a temple built for himself, right on Palatine Hill. At its center stood a golden statue of Caligula dressed as Jupiter, the king of Roman gods. But that wasn't enough. He wanted worship that corrupted the soul, not just bent the knee. He issued a command that senators' wives would serve as priestesses in this temple. Women who had once been respected matrons of Rome were now forced into religious rituals that included sexual acts with men who donated to the temple, all done in the name of divine service. These weren't private affairs. The temple was open to Rome's elite, and everyone knew exactly what was happening inside. Caligula made sure of it. This was his brilliance. By wrapping perversion in the robes of religion, he made refusal a crime. Refusing a sacred duty was sacrilege, and sacrilege was punished by death. He wasn't forcing them, not technically. He was offering them the honor of serving the divine emperor. But they knew, everyone knew, it was just another trap, designed to make you complicit or dead. The same women who once held court in Rome's most powerful homes were now on their knees in his temple, not praying, performing. It destroyed them, but they couldn't even grieve openly, not without dying. Then came the games. Rome had always loved gladiator fights, but Caligula twisted the tradition into something monstrous. He began forcing senators to fight in the arena. Not trained gladiators, not prisoners. Senators, sometimes against wild animals, other times against each other. The old, the weak, men who had led armies were thrown into blood sport while crowds watched. But the real cruelty was who he made sit in the front row, their wives, their daughters. And they were required to watch every second. If a woman turned her head, if she cried, if she so much as flinched, Caligula had her dragged into the arena too. There's one record, chilling in its detail, about Senator Quintus Pomponius. He was forced to face a starving leopard with nothing but a wooden club. His wife, Julia, was watching, 8 months pregnant. Quintus fought for nearly 12 minutes before the beast tore out his throat. Julia went into labor that same night. She and the baby both died. Caligula didn't attend the funeral, but he did seize their home and property the next morning. Everything he did had purpose, not chaos, not madness, but precision. He didn't just want to end men. He wanted to break their legacies, burn their names into the dirt, make sure even their children would carry shame. That was the genius of his reign. People confuse cruelty with insanity, but Caligula wasn't insane. He was deliberate. Every ritual had meaning. Not religious meaning, not political meaning, but psychological. He was teaching Rome that no title, no honor, no sacred bond could protect you. Only obedience could. Silent, humiliated obedience. And if you thought crawling on hands and knees like an animal was beneath Rome's proudest men, you were wrong. That was just another one of his games, one that made the old generals and senators scurry across marble floors like dogs. Because when Caligula clapped his hands, the doors would lock and the game would begin. The crawling game was one of Caligula's favorite rituals, not because it was violent, but because it was humiliating. He would host lavish feasts in his palace, with food that only the richest in the empire could afford, music playing softly in the background, and senators in their finest robes. Then halfway through the night he'd clap. The music would stop. The doors would lock. Silence would fall over the hall like a cold wind. Then came the command, "Crawl to me." Every senator had to get down on all fours and crawl across the polished marble floor toward the emperor's throne like dogs. No excuses, no exceptions. And the last man to reach him, executed on the spot. So they scrambled, old men, once commanders of legions, now pushing, clawing, even shoving each other to avoid being last. Some tripped, some wept, some bled, tearing their knees on the hard stone. There's a record from 38 CE describing one of these nights. Senator Lucius Vitellius, a man who had once led campaigns in Germania, tore his toga trying to get ahead. His knees left a trail of blood behind him. When he finally reached Caligula, panting and shaking, he stayed there, kneeling. The emperor ignored him for several minutes, casually sipping his wine. Then he smirked and pointed at his sandals. Vitellius leaned forward and licked them. That was the prize for winning. The reward for being fastest. Lick the emperor's feet or die. Some versions of the game were even more twisted. Sometimes Caligula made the senators' wives play instead. Their husbands' lives would hang in the balance. The command was clear: crawl like animals or watch your husband die. And they did. Women who had once walked in dignity now crawling like slaves, sobbing and shaking just to keep their families alive. But the most disturbing ritual wasn't played at a banquet or watched by crowds. It happened in silence, in the dead of night. And it broke people in ways no arena ever could. It was called the midnight summons. No one ever knew when it would come. The knock on the door could arrive at any hour. A guard with no explanation. Just 5 words. The emperor summons you now. The senator had minutes to dress. No time to think, no time to prepare. He would be taken through the dark streets of Rome, heart pounding, unsure if this would be his last night. Sometimes Caligula greeted him with wine and laughter, a feast, a toast, a joke, as if nothing was wrong, as if it were all just a late-night celebration. And the senator had to laugh along, had to toast, had to pretend he wasn't trembling inside. Other nights were worse. The senator would walk in and find Caligula in bed with his wife. The guards would stand behind him, making sure he watched. He couldn't look away. He couldn't speak. He just had to stand there and witness the slow destruction of everything he cared about. And some nights, the emperor didn't say a word. He would sit there staring in complete silence for hours, until finally he waved a hand and whispered, "You can go now." No reason, no warning, just a reminder. I own your life. The midnight summons didn't need blood to break a man. It didn't need swords or crowds or laughter. All it took was fear. Slow, creeping fear that soaked into your bones and never left. There's a record of one senator who was summoned 7 times in a single month. Sometimes for dinner, sometimes to witness unspeakable acts, sometimes for nothing at all. By the end, he no longer slept. He dressed at night, sat by his door waiting. If no one came, he panicked. If they did come, he prayed for death. That was Caligula's aim. Not to kill, to own, to hollow people out from the inside, until all that was left was obedience and dread. He didn't want resistance. He wanted silence, not peace, fear. And when you live like that long enough, death starts to look like freedom. By now, even the boldest senators were shadows of themselves. But Caligula wasn't finished. His last and most brilliant move was the one no one saw coming. He made everyone guilty, everyone complicit, every person who watched a woman dragged away and said nothing, guilty. Every guest who attended an auction and didn't object, guilty. Every senator whose wife served in the temple, guilty. He designed a system where silence was betrayal, but speaking was suicide. If you stayed quiet, you were part of the horror. If you spoke out, you were erased. And no one wanted to be next. That was the real genius. The rituals weren't just for Caligula's amusement. They were traps. One by one, Rome's elite became prisoners of their own shame. You couldn't complain about the horror without admitting you had watched it happen. You couldn't cry out without exposing your own guilt. That's how he ruled. Through shame, through silence, through fear that tied every man and woman in Rome to his cruelty. Some scholars tried to dismiss these tales over the centuries. They said ancient historians exaggerated, that they were trying to slander a dead emperor. But in 1987, during an excavation under Palatine Hill, archaeologists discovered something buried deep beneath the ruins, a hidden room, its marble walls still intact. On those walls were names, 23 of them, all women, and next to each name, a phrase carved in Latin, sententia mors, silence is death. They weren't just names. They were witnesses, survivors, victims, the wives of senators Caligula had publicly violated. And these women, under constant surveillance, had somehow found the strength and the courage to leave behind a message. A cry through time, remember us. Dr. Marco Bellini, the lead archaeologist, stood before the press and said, if anything, the ancient sources went too easy on him. For nearly 2,000 years, Rome tried to forget, tried to bury the shame, but stone remembers. And now so do we. So why does any of this matter now, after 2,000 years? Because what Caligula did wasn't just horror for horror's sake. It was a blueprint, a dark, twisted manual for how absolute power can turn even the strongest men into silent ghosts. He showed the world that cruelty doesn't always come with a knife. Sometimes it comes with a smile, a command, a game, and it leaves no marks, only silence. He only ruled for 4 years. That's all it took. In that short time, he shattered more than 200 families. He didn't just break the men of Rome. He made them complicit in their own fall. Senators who once led armies now crawled on all fours to lick his feet. Wives who once stood tall in the Senate balconies now knelt in his temples, forced into rituals, dressed up as worship. Daughters from noble houses sold like animals. And all of Rome watched. And what made it all possible? Not Caligula's madness, his method. He didn't want to simply punish or kill. That was too easy. He wanted to stain people, to trap them in shame so deep they could never speak of it. He understood that shame lasts longer than pain, that humiliation burns deeper than any blade. And if he could make you silent, he won. Seneca, who lived through Caligula's rule, once wrote, "A tyrant does not need to kill everyone. He only needs everyone to fear being next." And that's exactly what Caligula did. He made every senator wonder, am I next? Is tonight the night he takes my wife, my daughter, my life? And in that fear, they all became willing players in his theater of cruelty. But perhaps the most terrifying part of this story isn't that it happened. It's that it worked, because the silence didn't end when Caligula died. It carried on, in whispers, in missing records, in the gaps of history. The stories of those banquets, those auctions, those games were buried beneath marble and memory. Rome wanted to erase them, because remembering them meant facing a truth far too uncomfortable, that even the greatest empire on earth could be brought to its knees not by war, not by rebellion, but by one man's twisted obsession with power and humiliation. And if it could happen in Rome, it could happen anywhere. When Caligula was finally assassinated in January of 41 CE, Rome exhaled, as if waking from a nightmare. The emperor's blood soaked into the marble corridors of the palace where he had once made men crawl, where women had screamed behind curtains, where games were played with human souls. His murder wasn't an act of justice, it was a desperate act of self-preservation. Those closest to him knew the empire couldn't survive much longer under his reign. But the scars he left behind didn't fade with his death, because what he truly destroyed wasn't Rome's economy, or its military, or even its government. It was Rome's soul. He had shown that the empire's most sacred institutions, marriage, religion, family, even honor itself, could be twisted into tools of obedience. He turned senators into cowards, wives into temple offerings, and children into currency. He didn't just abuse power, he corrupted it in a way no one thought possible. And the worst part, the people let him. Yes, many feared him, but fear alone doesn't explain silence on such a massive scale. What Caligula did over time was condition them to stop reacting, to accept horror as routine. He normalized it, slowly, cleverly, banquets first, then auctions, then temples, then games, until even the most unthinkable acts became just. Tuesday. By the time his guards turned on him, the people weren't just scared, they were exhausted, but they were also ashamed. Because deep down, they knew they had allowed it to happen. Not all of them actively participated. Most didn't, but they saw, they knew, and they said nothing. That's the part that chills you when you read these stories closely. It's not just what Caligula did, it's what he made everyone else not do. The senators who once thundered in the halls of debate now sat in silence. The generals who once gave speeches before battles now crawled across the floor for a chance to live. And the fathers who once swore to protect their children stood and watched while their daughters were auctioned like livestock. It wasn't madness. It was a system designed to turn every man, woman, and child in Rome into a reflection of Caligula's cruelty. And the system worked. Years after Caligula's death, whispers still haunted the Senate halls. Some of the men who survived his reign went on pretending it never happened. Others drank themselves into oblivion, trying to forget. A few retired quietly to the countryside, carrying their guilt like a shadow. But Rome never truly dealt with what Caligula had done. The rituals, the crawling games, the temple sacrifices, the auctions were never officially recorded in imperial history. They were wiped clean from the scrolls, burned, buried, silenced, but not erased because survivors talk. Servants talk. Guards who had stood behind senators with drawn swords, they talked too. Whispers became stories, and stories became warnings. And in those warnings, one truth always remained. Caligula didn't just humiliate the body. He crushed the spirit. The genius of his cruelty wasn't just in the spectacle. It was in the way he made people destroy themselves. Senators who watched their wives crawl for their lives had to go home and pretend everything was fine. Fathers who lost daughters at auctions had to stand up in public and praise the emperor. Their voices betrayed nothing, but their eyes did. Rome became a city of haunted eyes. Even after Caligula was gone, no one dared talk about what really happened. To speak of it would mean admitting they had survived it and done nothing. That they had watched neighbors disappear, heard the screams through the palace walls, toasted wine while children were dragged through silk-curtained halls. That they had knelt, crawled, and licked sandals just to keep breathing. That was the real legacy Caligula left behind. Not just death, but shame so heavy that no one wanted to carry it. And so they buried it. The Senate passed reforms, sure. They debated new laws, praised his successor Claudius, and promised things would be different. But the truth of what they endured was never spoken. They hoped time would erase it. That history would forget. But history has a strange way of remembering, not in books, not in speeches, but in silence. And under that silence, the names carved in stone beneath the palace remain. Not because Rome wanted them remembered, but because those women, those victims, refused to be lost in the darkness. They left behind their truth. Sententia mors, silence is death, those words etched in stone, silence is death, were more than a message. They were a warning for the future. Caligula may have died in 41 CE, but the system he built didn't vanish with him. The tools of his control, fear, shame, humiliation, still exist. They've just changed faces. Look around today. In every institution where people stay quiet to protect their careers, their reputations, their lives, his methods live on. In every organization where the powerful use shame to silence the weak. In every system where speaking the truth means exile, punishment, or worse. The crawling games are no longer held on marble floors, but the crawling still happens. Just behind desks, in boardrooms, on screens. The rituals are different, but the silence is the same. This is why Caligula's story matters. Not because it's a shocking tale from a distant empire, but because it shows what happens when silence becomes survival, when fear turns a society inward, when cruelty becomes culture and no one dares call it out. Caligula's name survives in whispers, as a symbol of madness. But that's not quite right. He wasn't out of control. He was in complete control. Every ritual was designed, every humiliation calculated. He didn't lose himself to power. He used it with purpose, to bend the entire Roman elite into submission. And that's what makes his story truly terrifying, because it worked. He ruled just 4 years, but in that time, he didn't just damage people. He made them complicit in their own degradation. And even after he was gone, they couldn't speak. Not because they weren't free, but because the shame was too deep. He had turned their silence into a cage, and he locked the door with their own hands. In the end, the true horror of Caligula wasn't what he did to his victims, it's what he made them become. Quiet, numb, willing, and if you think that kind of power died with Rome, look again. It's still here, just wearing different robes, sitting in different palaces. History doesn't repeat. It remembers. And now, so do you.